My parents sold my inheritance to pay off my brother's debts. Now they're homeless and begging me for the help I once desperately needed. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the responsible one in my family. Even as a teenager, I was the one who stayed behind when my friends went out, taking extra shifts at the corner store or babysitting my younger brother Ryan, while Mom and Dad praised him for being so creative or charming. It wasn't that Ryan was bad. He was likable, funny, and everyone adored him. But he had this knack for drifting through life without consequences. I, on the other hand, learned early that responsibility often meant sacrifice, late nights, and hard, unacknowledged work. Mom would beam at him whenever he bragged about a new gadget he bought on credit, and Dad would laugh off the missed rent payments he sometimes avoided. Meanwhile, I was quietly footing bills, keeping the household running smoothly, and making sure no one noticed when money got tight. I remember one evening, standing in our cramped kitchen, balancing my paycheck against Ryan's college tuition needs, and Mom smiling warmly at him while saying, "Your brother will figure it out. You're such a steady one." I nodded, smiling back, pretending it didn't sting, even as a pit of frustration settled in my chest. Life wasn't glamorous. My apartment smelled faintly of takeout boxes and laundry detergent, and I often fell asleep to the hum of my second job's machines while Ryan slept in, late nights spent gaming or hanging with friends. But there was a strange pride in it, a quiet, stubborn belief that doing the right thing mattered. I told myself that one day my loyalty and hard work would be recognized, that someday, when life demanded it, my family would see the sacrifices I had quietly made all these years. Even now, I catch myself watching Ryan, sometimes wondering how someone so reckless can always land on their feet. I feel a twinge of jealousy, sure, but mostly a strange mixture of protectiveness and weary acceptance. He's my brother after all, and I've always trusted that Mom and Dad's guidance would keep everything fair. Somehow, deep down, I still believe that loyalty, hard work, and responsibility are virtues that eventually pay off. But lately, there's been a quiet tension in the air, subtle enough that I almost convince myself it's nothing. A missed bill here, a whispered phone call there, a glance between my parents that says more than words ever could. And yet, I push it aside, telling myself life has a way of balancing itself out, until the day I realized it hadn't. Ryan had always been the golden child, and it wasn't just me who noticed it. Even when he skipped classes or ignored responsibilities, Mom and Dad would laugh it off, as if his charm excused everything. "He's just figuring himself out," Dad would say, his voice casual, like he wasn't talking about money that Ryan had borrowed and never paid back. Meanwhile, I kept meticulous records, balanced budgets, and worked late nights to make sure everything stayed afloat. I loved my family, but the more I sacrificed, the more glaring the favoritism became. It was like watching someone skate across a frozen lake while I was wading through mud, my every effort unseen, my every success understated. There was this one Friday night that sticks with me. Ryan strolled in wearing a brand new jacket, the tag still peeking from the pocket. Mom practically clapped her hands, cooing, "Oh, look at my boy. You deserve it." I forced a smile, nodding as if his happiness didn't sting me with a quiet, bitter envy. Later, when she asked if I wanted to join him in celebrating, I said no, slipping back to my second job's night shift, ignoring the lump in my throat. Ryan didn't even notice my absence. He was too busy laughing with Mom, recounting some story about a car he hadn't even paid for yet. It wasn't just material things either. It was the praise, the attention, the way their eyes lit up for him but often glossed over me, the one holding everything together. And yet I believed them. I believed that fairness would prevail, that one day my steadiness would be recognized, and the scales would tip back toward justice. I even found myself making excuses for them. Perhaps they didn't realize. Perhaps they thought I'd understand. Still, there was a gnawing sensation in my gut I couldn't shake. Each time Ryan came home with a new gadget, a new debt, a new reckless adventure, the pit in my stomach deepened. I tried to ignore it, to focus on work, to focus on the stability I had carved out for myself. But the cracks were forming, subtle yet undeniable, and I could feel a storm brewing behind our perfectly curated family facade. Little did I know, that storm wasn't coming for Ryan, it was coming for me, the inheritance. Even saying the word now makes my chest tighten. My grandfather had left a modest house and some savings specifically to me, a small token of recognition for being the eldest and, supposedly, the responsible one. I remember the day Mom handed me the legal papers, smiling faintly, as if the weight of it was meant to feel like a gift. I had plans, real plans, for that inheritance. A home of my own, a foundation for my future, maybe even a small investment to finally feel secure. I pictured painting the walls, hanging framed photos of moments I actually controlled, not the constant chaos of bailing everyone else out. But, almost immediately, the cracks appeared. My parents didn't see it as mine. They said things like, "We thought it would be better to help Ryan first. He's in trouble, and we can't just ignore him." I froze, staring at the papers in my hands as a strange mix of disbelief and anger coursed through me. "But it was left for me," I murmured, more to myself than them. Mom's smile faltered for a second before she gently said, "Family comes first, you know that. You're so responsible. You'll understand." And I did understand in a way. I understood that they were choosing him over me. And yet, I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. I started to watch closely, my chest tightening every time Ryan made a new purchase or bragged about some risk he had taken with the money that was never his. I tried to believe that it was temporary, that fairness would somehow prevail, that my parents would realize the mistake before it was too late. But every whispered phone call behind closed doors, every furtive glance between them, made the pit in my stomach grow heavier. Late at night, in my tiny apartment, I would sit with a cup of cold coffee, staring at the ceiling, imagining what I could have done with that inheritance. My own space, my own freedom, a life built for me, not everyone else. And yet, despite the rising frustration, despite the unfairness, I clung to one fragile hope, that hard work, loyalty, and patience were virtues that eventually paid off. Until the day I realized that hope had been sold out from under me. I found out the truth in the worst possible way. It wasn't a casual comment, not a subtle hint. It was staring at me in black and white on the legal documents I had requested for reassurance. The house was gone. The savings were gone. Every plan I had carefully tucked away in my mind, every bit of hope I had for independence and stability had been sold, without my knowledge, without my consent. My parents had sold my inheritance to cover Ryan's debts. I stared at the numbers, the signatures, the date, feeling my chest tighten and a cold, hollow rage settle deep inside me. Mom and Dad tried to explain. "We didn't want to worry you," Mom said, her voice trembling but composed. "Ryan, he needed it more than you did. He's our baby. We had to help him." I felt the anger rising, coiling around me like fire, but I also felt a creeping disbelief, as if I was watching someone else's life unravel in front of me. "You sold my inheritance? Without even asking me?" I asked, my voice barely holding back the tremor. Dad just nodded, guilt and resolve battling across his features. "We thought you'd understand. You always have." I wanted to scream, to punch something, to shake the people who had raised me, the people I had always trusted to act fairly. I wanted to cry, too. Cry for all the sacrifices, all the nights I had stayed awake working extra shifts so the bills were covered, so Ryan could coast. I remembered every time they had praised him for nothing. Every time they told me to be patient, to be understanding, to be the mature one. And now that patience had been rewarded with betrayal. I walked through my apartment, the walls closing in on me, the silence heavy with the weight of my frustration. The streetlight outside cast shadows across the empty room, mocking the emptiness inside me. I realized in that moment that my trust in them, my faith in fairness, had been misplaced. The people who should have protected me, who should have honored my sacrifices, had chosen him instead. And yet, as the initial shock wore off, a dangerous clarity emerged. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect, boundaries, and finally deciding how much more I was willing to endure. After that day, I started noticing everything differently. The subtle cracks in our family facade were no longer whispers. They were glaring, impossible to ignore. Friends and extended family still treated us like the perfect, tight-knit family, unaware of the betrayal simmering beneath the surface. They praised Ryan for his charm, his responsible attempts to pay back debts, his occasional generosity, while I remained the invisible engine keeping everything running. I was the one who had sacrificed sleep, sanity, and dreams to make life smoother for everyone else, yet the world only noticed Ryan's half-hearted efforts. One evening, I caught Ryan lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone with a new set of golf clubs sitting in the corner, unwrapped, gleaming in the soft lamplight. I felt a twist of anger and disbelief. "Did you even think about asking me?" I muttered, barely containing my frustration. He looked up, shrugged, and said casually, "It's family money. Mom and Dad said it's fine." That casual dismissal, that flippant attitude, felt like a punch to the gut. My parents were hovering nearby, their smiles faint but expectant, like they anticipated I'd forgive and move on. And for a second, I almost did, out of habit, out of that ingrained sense of loyalty that had defined my entire life. But I couldn't. I couldn't ignore the betrayal anymore. Each laugh, each careless purchase, each whispered plan behind my back tightened the knot of resentment in my chest. I started keeping notes, small mental records of every injustice, every favoritism, every silent dismissal of my efforts. The pit in my stomach was growing heavier by the day, a constant reminder that fairness had been replaced with convenience. And yet, I couldn't stop watching, couldn't stop hoping that somehow my parents would see what they'd done, that somehow they'd recognize the years of sacrifice I'd poured into this family, the sleepless nights, the empty apartment, the compromises I had made so Ryan could skate by, but deep down, a small voice whispered that maybe this time, hope alone wasn't enough. Something had to give, and I had no idea when or how the breaking point would come. It was supposed to be a routine visit, just checking in on Mom and Dad, making sure things hadn't completely spiraled out of control. What I wasn't prepared for was the truth staring me in the face. Their little apartment, the one they had downsized to after selling my inheritance, was trashed. Bills stacked in teetering piles, eviction notices pinned to the fridge, boxes of unpaid credit card statements spilling onto the floor. And then came the confession, heavy and hesitant. Ryan had blown through every penny, not just the inheritance but other family assets they'd tried to hold on to. Mom's voice broke as she admitted, "We didn't have a choice. We thought we could manage it somehow, but it's all gone." I felt the ground fall away beneath me. My parents, the people who had always demanded loyalty from me, who had praised Ryan while ignoring my sacrifices, were now begging for help. Homeless, desperate, and utterly dependent on the one they had betrayed. "Please, can you help us just this once?" Dad whispered, eyes wide and pleading. It was surreal. The people who had sold me out, who had chosen my reckless brother over me, were now standing there, vulnerable and broken, expecting me to bail them out. I could feel my chest tightening, my blood boiling, but beneath the rage was something else, a sharp, icy clarity. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about accountability, about finally recognizing that loyalty had been weaponized against me for years. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every time I swallowed my resentment had led to this moment. And now they were begging, expecting me to forgive and forget, as if nothing had happened. I looked around the tiny, cold apartment, the smell of old takeout and mildew filling my nostrils, and realized something chilling. The people who had betrayed me were completely at my mercy, and for the first time in years I felt the power shift. The scales were tipping, and this time I wasn't sure if I wanted to tip them back in their favor. But even as I wrestled with what to do, a storm of emotions churned inside me, anger, guilt, fear, and a bitter satisfaction that the tables had finally turned. Yet I couldn't shake the thought. How far would I go before I crossed a line I might never come back from? They showed up at my door one rainy evening, drenched and shivering, carrying a single suitcase between them. Mom's eyes were wide, glistening with tears, and Dad looked smaller somehow, like the weight of years of poor decisions had physically shrunk him. "We don't have anywhere else to go," Mom said, her voice trembling. Please, just for a little while. We'll pay you back, we promise." I felt something inside me twist, a combination of disbelief, rage, and a strange, sickening pity. These were the people who had sold me out, who had chosen Ryan over me, who had erased my future without hesitation. And now, they were standing on my doorstep, asking for my help like nothing had ever happened. I wanted to slam the door, to scream, to tell them exactly what I thought of their choices and their betrayal. Instead, I let them in, the storm outside mirroring the chaos churning in my chest. Their presence filled my apartment, their damp coats dripping onto my worn carpet, their voices soft and pleading. Every word they spoke felt like a knife twisting in old wounds. Every "we're sorry" echoing the years they had ignored my sacrifices. Ryan, of course, was nowhere to be found. He had vanished again, leaving me alone to deal with the consequences of their choices. I sank onto my couch, burying my face in my hands, and let the anger, frustration, and exhaustion wash over me. The room smelled of rain and mildew, a tangible reminder of everything I had been carrying for years, and now the people who caused it were expecting me to shoulder it too. I remembered all the nights I had stayed awake, all the extra shifts, all the compromises, all the times I had swallowed my pride and forgone my own dreams for them. And now, standing here, I felt completely powerless and completely enraged, all at once. A part of me wanted to walk away, to slam the door and never look back. But another part, the part trained for decades to protect and forgive, kept me rooted, silent, calculating. I realized in that moment that the next choice I made would define not just this night, but the rest of my life. And I had no idea what that choice would be. I finally forced myself to speak, my voice low but steady, cutting through the tension in the small apartment. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I asked, my hands gripping the edge of the coffee table as if it could anchor me. Mom flinched and Dad looked away, avoiding my gaze. We didn't mean to hurt you," Mom whispered, her words trembling but hollow. "We thought we were helping Ryan." I laughed bitterly, a sound I didn't recognize coming from my own throat. "Helping Ryan? You sold me out. You erased my future for him, and now you want me to bail you out like nothing happened?" The room felt smaller somehow, the walls pressing in as I unleashed years of bottled-up resentment. I listed everything: the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the money I had sent home, the bills I had covered while they praised Ryan's charm over my hard work. Each word hit like a hammer, and I could see the guilt creeping across their faces. Yet, alongside it, there was that same sense of entitlement that had always defined them, the quiet expectation that I would forgive, forget, and move on, just like I always had. Ryan appeared briefly in my mind. His smirk, the way he acted as if the world owed him something, the careless laughter that had haunted me for years. I realized then that this confrontation wasn't just about Mom and Dad anymore. It was about finally standing up to the entire pattern of favoritism and manipulation that had defined my life. "I won't be your safety net anymore," I said firmly, my voice trembling with emotion. "Not for him. Not for you. I've given enough." The air between us was electric, heavy with years of unspoken truths. Mom opened her mouth, then closed it. Dad swallowed, tears brimming in his eyes. And in that moment, I knew the balance had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't the one being manipulated. I was the one in control. But even as I spoke the words, I couldn't shake the gnawing thought, would they ever truly change? Or was this just another chapter in a cycle I couldn't break? After that confrontation, I started taking concrete steps. No more vague promises, no more silent sacrifices. I began by consulting a lawyer to understand my rights, what I could reclaim, and how to establish boundaries that even my parents couldn't ignore. The realization hit me hard. For years, I had been bending over backwards, and it hadn't earned me respect or fairness. Ryan had gotten away with everything while I quietly carried the weight. Now, the power dynamic had shifted, and I wasn't planning on letting it slip back. Mom and Dad reacted with shock at first. Their eyes widened every time I mentioned legal consultation or boundaries, and their voices wavered between pleading and denial. "We never thought you'd—" Dad started, but I cut him off. "I've spent my entire life thinking I could trust you," I said, my voice calm but firm. And you've proven that trust was misplaced. I won't be responsible for Ryan's debts anymore, and I won't let you manipulate me again." They were speechless, the gravity of my words finally sinking in. I also confronted Ryan, indirectly at first through calls and messages. No more excuses, no more flippant comments. Every debt, every irresponsible decision, every lie was laid bare. I made it clear that I would no longer be the safety net, the invisible support that allowed him to coast through life. The first time I heard him stammer, unsure of how to respond, a small, bitter satisfaction coursed through me. For years, he had held the upper hand with charm and manipulation, but now accountability was finally coming for him. I felt a strange combination of relief and unease. Relief because I had finally drawn the line, finally taken control. Unease because the fallout would be messy. Emotions were raw, tempers high, and I knew my parents and Ryan wouldn't give in quietly. But for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I was steering the ship. And as I looked at the growing tension, I realized something crucial. I could finally dictate the terms of my life, and no one could take that away from me. Yet, even with control in my hands, the hardest confrontation was still ahead. I called them into the apartment one last time. This wasn't a casual check-in or a tentative conversation. I needed closure, a reckoning for years of manipulation, favoritism, and betrayal. Mom arrived first, her eyes wide and wary, clutching her purse like a shield. Dad followed, hesitant, shifting from foot to foot as if expecting the floor to give way beneath him. Ryan was absent, of course, probably assuming he could slide by as usual. I stood in the middle of the living room, the faint hum of the heater filling the silence, and I let it all out. You have no idea what it's like to constantly sacrifice, to give everything you have while watching someone else take credit for nothing, I said, my voice steady but laced with years of pent-up fury. You sold my inheritance. You prioritized Ryan over me. And now, after everything, you expect me to bail you out again? Mom tried to interrupt, her lips trembling. I held up a hand. No, you listen. I've carried the weight for too long, and I'm done being the family's safety net. You need to understand the consequences of your choices, all of you. For a moment, the room was frozen. Mom's eyes welled with tears, Dad's jaw tightened, and I saw, for the first time, the weight of responsibility reflected back at them. They couldn't charm, guilt, or manipulate me anymore. I had named every grievance, laid bare every betrayal, and I refused to step back. Ryan had to face accountability, and they had to face the consequences of enabling him. It was painful, watching them realize the full scope of their failures. But it was necessary. The air was heavy with the echoes of past injustices, yet in that weight I found a strange, hard-earned peace. I wasn't just standing up for myself. I was rewriting the rules of our family, finally asserting the dignity that had been ignored for decades. And as they left, stunned and humbled, I realized something vital. For the first time, the power was mine, and I would never let it slip away. The aftermath was surreal. For the first time in years, I felt the quiet satisfaction of watching accountability unfold. Ryan was finally confronted with the full weight of his actions. Debts he could no longer dodge, responsibilities he could no longer ignore. No more charm, no more excuses, no more skate-through-life antics. I watched him struggle, for once uncomfortable and uncertain, and there was a bitter thrill in knowing that the imbalance I'd endured for so long was finally tipping in my favor. Mom and Dad, too, were humbled. They had no illusions left about their choices. The guilt that had once been subtle, masked by manipulation and charm, was now glaring and undeniable. They couldn't guilt me into forgiveness, couldn't lean on my loyalty as a crutch, and they had to face the consequences of enabling Ryan. It wasn't easy, I won't pretend it was, but it was necessary. For years, I had been invisible in my own family, my sacrifices overlooked, my boundaries ignored. Watching them finally reckon with reality brought a deep sense of relief I hadn't realized I was craving. Friends and extended family began noticing the shift too. For once, my efforts weren't silent or taken for granted. I no longer felt like the invisible pillar holding up a collapsing structure. I had drawn lines, demanded respect, and enforced consequences, and the world around me had finally acknowledged it. There was a strange sense of validation, not from applause or praise, but from the quiet knowledge that I had stood my ground, reclaimed my power, and demanded fairness on my own terms. And in that moment, I realized something I had long forgotten. Loyalty and responsibility are virtues only when met with respect. When ignored, they can become chains. I had broken free from those chains, not through anger alone, but through clarity, resolve, and a willingness to enforce the boundaries I had long neglected. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. But even with justice served, a part of me knew the final piece of this story, the real piece, was still waiting. In the weeks that followed, the silence was deafening. Ryan, as expected, drifted further into his mess, now forced to face the consequences of his actions without the safety net I had once provided. He didn't reach out, didn't try to mend things. He was too proud, too arrogant, or perhaps too ashamed. I didn't care. For the first time in my life, his decisions didn't affect me anymore. The weight I'd been carrying for years, the guilt, the sense of obligation, all of it began to lift. I felt lighter, like I could finally breathe without the constant pressure of trying to fix someone else's mistakes. Mom and Dad, on the other hand, seemed to finally understand. They never apologized in the way I wanted, but their actions spoke louder than any words could. They stopped asking for help, stopped expecting me to bail them out, and began to rebuild their lives, this time on their own terms. They were trying, slowly, awkwardly, but sincerely, and that was enough for me. I didn't need them to grovel. I just needed them to change, to respect the boundaries I had set. And for the first time, they did. There was no grand apology, no dramatic closure, but there didn't need to be. The real peace wasn't in what they said or did. It was in the quiet strength I had finally found in myself. I had spent so long waiting for someone else to recognize my worth, for them to acknowledge my sacrifices. But the moment I stopped needing their approval was the moment I reclaimed my life. I spent more time doing what I loved, reconnecting with old friends, investing in my own future. I bought a small place, not the grand house I'd once dreamed of, but something of my own, a space where I could finally exist without constantly making room for everyone else. And it felt good. It felt like freedom. Ryan never came around, and part of me thought he never would. But I didn't need him to. I didn't need anyone to validate the choices I'd made, the lines I'd drawn. I had found something far more important: my own peace. The old wounds still sting, but I've learned to live with them, to turn them into reminders of why I can never go back. The lessons were hard-earned, but they were mine. I'm not the same person I was a year ago. I'm stronger, more certain of who I am and what I will never tolerate again. And finally, for the first time in my life, I can say this with certainty: I'm free.